Briefly about me and my family, if you don't know us or don't know, my husband David, my greatest support, and then we have children. We have our oldest, Naomi, who's 3. As Pastor Ryan kind of talked about, we had a son named Arlo who passed away when he was 7 months old. We have our in the process of adoption son, Liam. And we have one on the way, in case you didn't know.
Amen.
I got it. I don't know. Okay, there we go. Just click it. So, topic summary. I decided to put on the projector Beauty for Ashes, but really kind of my topic is grief. And I thought that was too aggressive to put up on the screen. They're just like, grief. And everyone's going to be like, well, we're leaving. This doesn't sound fun. But I promise it won't be a big fat bummer. But yeah, that was my more positive spin on it. But really the topic is kind of all about grief and grieving. I'm going to kind of go through a couple things that the Lord has been speaking to me kind of through the last couple of years in the process of some of the mourning that we went through. But just to clarify, none of this is like a how-to explanation on how I think you should grieve or, whatever. It's not that at all. It's just kind of what the Lord has been speaking to me. All of our processes are so different. The way we experience grief and the way we go through grieving, 2 different things, and it's always in different orders and different things. So I'm not going to stand up here and tell you, how to go through it. But these are just some things that the Lord has been speaking to me. And on the note of like me, offering to share, this has been something that the Lord has kind of been encouraging me to do for kind of a couple months. And I was like, I really don't want to. I don't want to ask. It's definitely like a weird thing to do and kind of like humbling. But I'm going to kind of get into this later. But in the encouragement to be willing to share, the Lord was really revealing more of His identity to me. And I shouldn't even say revealing because He's always revealing His identity to us. But He was opening my eyes to more of His true identity. And I've grown in a lot of things, as we're going to talk about through mourning, but there's been a lot of like personal growth in me that's kind of like aside from anything we went through. Just I've said before to people that what we went through has been a catapult into a closer relationship with the Lord. So everything that has happened to us aside, the Lord has really been revealing His true identity to me in the way that I have needed it. So just being patient and like if you're not ready, I'm not going to whack you on the back of the head and be like, get up and share. Like, He's gracious and He's merciful. So yeah, I'm going to open in a brief prayer just to kind of center ourselves and go before the Lord. So, Lord, we just thank You for Your presence in this room today. We invite Your presence into each of our hearts, Lord. I pray that You would just help to speak through me. We give You all the honor and glory for every bit of this message and all the words that You have been speaking to my heart, and I pray and hope will be an encouragement to some people today. So, I'm going to read first. I have a lot of references up. Some I will read. Some maybe just write down because I realize I have maybe slightly too much. And some are longer, and I would say probably turn to them if you want to. If you want a Bible, Alex or Brandon or somebody, you can get one if you want to raise your hand. I think I'm supposed to say that. If you want a Bible. But this first one I'll just read. It's in Isaiah 61:3, and I'm going to read from NLT. My Bible is NIV, but I liked the way it was written in NLT. To all who mourn in Israel, He will give a crown of beauty for ashes, a joyous blessing instead of mourning, a festive praise instead of despair. In their righteousness they will be like great oaks that the Lord has planted for His glory. So, on to my... Oops. Do I point this out? Somebody?
Forward.
Forward? No, not working. Just an arrow? Turn it on.
There's an on switch on the side.
Oh, I got it. Okay.
There we go.
Okay. That was a lot. All right. So I have kind of 8 points of focus that I've broken up into 2 parts. just to kind of help keep us, on the move and not be like all over the place. And if you're a note taker, you can write them down and keep everything organized. So the first 4 are what our Father extends to us, and this is kind of like through your grief, through your mourning. That's kind of the topic. And then the second 4 are what we can extend to our Father, through these experiences. And it's kind of like your opportunities, like what kind of, opportunity do you get? That's kind of hard to be like, an opportunity? Anyway. So first one, first one is I am here and I know grief well. This one's not too hard to clarify in the Bible. So like really just opening your Bible to almost anywhere, you're going to find a lot of grief and suffering because we all go through it. And there's plenty in the Bible. So it's easy to find how the Lord has walked through grief with people in the Bible. And like just to name a few, if we're just going through the Old Testament, Job, king of grief. I mean, that whole book is like full of like anguish. He lost his property, he lost his children, he suffered like serious physical agony, and you kind of walk with him through all of that, and God's like, read it anyway. And then, in Ruth, you can learn about Naomi, who lost her husband and her sons, and basically for that time for a woman, that kind of just left you with like no identity, basically. So she was, so overcome with her mourning, so much so that she changed her name from Naomi, which means pleasantness, to Mara, I think, which means bitter. And then King David, we read something from Psalms today. A lot of Psalms is very beautiful and poetic, and some of it's a little bit like melodramatic. And he is a very forthcoming, he says it like it is to God, and some of it's like, whoa, that's some intense stuff. So yeah, reading through any of that, you can see God's not afraid to hear this stuff. It's in the Bible. I realize now that 2 out of 3 of those are names in my family. We will not be naming our son Job, though. So, in case anybody was wondering. So then, of course, Jesus, in the New Testament, we watch him literally walk with people through suffering, which is so cool. The whole Gospels are all so awesome and a great thing to read through. He showed compassion for a lot of people and healed people and forgave sins. And this was people from many different backgrounds, many different financial statuses. It didn't really matter. People that were deserving and people that were undeserving. He showed compassion on all of them. One thing I think personally is just really cool is he shed tears at the grave of Lazarus. So he comes quote unquote too late. And they're like, you came too late, you could have healed him, and he's died, and he weeps. I think that's the verse of he wept, right?
Yes.
The one verse. And it's just so interesting to me that he wept, even though he knows I'm about to raise him from the dead, but he cried anyway, and it just kind of shows, the identity of our Father. And then in the Garden of Gethsemane, before Jesus was arrested and crucified. And I think the whole being crucified and arrested and all that, I think that's pretty obvious for the whole suffering topic. I don't even think I need to get into it too much. But I just wanted to read through what he says before being arrested when he's in the garden with his disciples. In Matthew 26:38. This isn't very long if you don't want to turn to it. He said, then my soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death. Stay here and keep watch with me. Going a little farther, he fell with his face to the ground and prayed, my Father, if it is possible, may this cup be taken from me. Yet as not I will, but as you will. So he's so desperate. So desperate that he's saying, God, does this really need to happen? Can you take this cup from me? His soul is overwhelmed with the sorrow. So that just is kind of you're reading him experiencing suffering. And side note to that, I was reading through this chapter the other day with David, with myself, David was there, and I was cracking up laughing because it's not funny, but it's kind of funny when you read through this whole part, and then the disciples, after he says that, he leaves to go pray, Jesus leaves to go pray, and the disciples fall asleep, and then he comes back and he's like, why are you sleeping? He's like, can you please keep watch for me? And he leaves again to pray. And they fall asleep again. And he comes back, they're still asleep. And he's like, all right, whatever. Goes back to pray again. He comes back, they're still sleeping. And I just think it's like, oh, how embarrassing for these disciples. But it's just like, they keep falling asleep. Maybe I have a weird sense of humor, but I think it's not funny. Where am I going with this? So, keep falling asleep. Side note, onto the side note. I kind of question, like, if, later, after, everything happened with Jesus and he died, would they look back on that and be like, guys, he really should have stayed awake. Like, that was, he was, like, suffering. He was overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, and he just fell asleep. And, the side note is, like, Jesus was telling them, hey, this is going to happen. But I don't think they really, like, believed it. And it says a lot in, like, previous chapters where they're like, no, Jesus, like, no, that's not going to happen. Like, we don't allow that to happen. We don't allow them to arrest you. And, like, how could you, like, die? Like, you're supposed to be our Savior. And they were kind of in a little bit of denial about it. So I kind of questioned, like, maybe they fell asleep because they were like, it's fine. Like, nothing's going to happen. But then in retrospect. And that's kind of just going to go into later. We're going to kind of talk about, like, what Jesus' plans for our life is. And, like, Jesus knew and clarified with, asking God, like, can you take this cup from me? He knew, like, this is the plan. This is what needs to happen. And it's going to involve grief and suffering. But it's the Lord's plan. And then just, to add on to this of, I'm here and I know Greek well. I really do believe that everybody's, like, greatest compassion and understanding can come from the Lord. I know for me, and probably for a lot of people, so often it's just like, I feel so isolated and alone while going through something. But Jesus knows the gravity of your situation. Really more than, like, even my husband could know what I was feeling.
Yes.
And that's just so beautiful. Okay, so 2.
Good.
3. Sorry. All right, so 2 is his fullness, or like his completeness. I know it's kind of like an open-ended thing to say. And what I mean by that is, like, his fullness, not just in, like, our circumstances or what we're going through, but in him alone. I kind of, like, was going to go into Habakkuk. It's only 3 chapters, so if you want to read through it, maybe, like, do some other time. But I'm not going to read through it just for the sake of time. But just basically, like I said, it's only 3 chapters, and Habakkuk kind of goes through, he's going through, like, some really tough circumstances, and he goes through these, like, pretty, like, aggressive, serious, like, complaints to God, and then it goes to God's answer, back to his complaining, and back to God's answer, and, like, rightful complaining. Maybe I shouldn't use the word complaining. And then in the end, he kind of is, like, singing this song of, like, joyous, like, worship to God. So you get to, like, really see, like, all this stuff that he's, like, opening up to the Lord about. And then in the end, he says, you know what? Aside from my circumstances, I am complete in the Lord. So, maybe just read it later if you want. So going back to, like, what I said about clarifying God's identity, like I have kind of experience with even wanting to share this morning. God's identity is the anchors to our relationship with him. And I think I have felt this. Sometimes we're taught or told or maybe even just receive the wrong identity of God, or we misrepresent him, maybe because it's what we want or what we're being told, I don't know. And sometimes we want God to be good for us. You're like, what do we get out of you, God? Like, you want me to, be in a relationship with you? Well, what do I get out of it? That's an easy thing to do. Like, there's the popular term, like the prosperity God. And that's kind of like, his main concern is all about your health and your wealth. And you will learn that's not right. Or, sometimes just like, that your sin is just, you can't avoid it and there's no way to be holy. Or a legalistic God, then that hurts. So many people maybe grow up in a church or whatever, where it's just like, it's all do's and don'ts. It's just all legalities, and it's like, where's the relationship? But here's like some basic truths about the identity of God. He's compassionate and gracious. He's loving and faithful, and he's forgiving and just. And you don't even need to, like, go off of me. I don't know things. But just, you can get to know his identity in the Word and in your devoted time with him. And you don't even, you don't have to receive that from me. You can find it yourself. I kind of needed to do this. I needed to restart with my identity with God after going through a lot of things. I had so many questions and, just like, God, what are you doing? Like, where are you? And I just had to start with God as good. And we sang that this morning. Like, that was kind of my start on the truth about God's identity. Was just saying to myself, you are good. I don't get this. I'm pretty offended. I'm not too happy, but you are good. And I had to, preach that to myself. So, we preach to ourselves the truth about God.
Good.
So the third one here. Come as you are. This has been very meaningful to David and I. I was maybe going to have David share, but it didn't, anyway. David's known to talk longer than me, and I was already like, I think I might have had too much, and it's just like, maybe not. Anyway, but you can always talk to us anytime. We're very open. We'll talk to you. But God's not scared of your grief, so come as you are. I have Luke 7 in there, and that's about like the sinful woman that anointed Jesus' head with oil. I'm not going to read through it because, again, with time, but if you want to write it down and read it later, that's a good example of like, come as you are. And Jesus kind of throws it in the face of a Pharisee and says, like, no, you come as you are. So number 4 of what Jesus extends to us is his poured out sacrifice. And this is the big one. The biggest deal of all. Dying for our redemption, our hope beyond the grave. That's where our greatest redemption lies. And I don't want to go too far into David and I's like personal story and testimony, but I do want to like be open and be honest with you. And like I said, we'll talk to you about anything if you ever want to ask us. We really aren't uncomfortable talking about it. So if you want to know, you can ask us. But just, in this topic, a little bit of personal testimony for me. Many of you know we found out about Liam, that he was born a little over a month after our son Arlo passes away. And it was kind of like, due to circumstances, it was immediate, like, you can take him home if you want. So, we go, so Liam was in the NICU for about a month, and I will not go into all the details because it's long and boring and confusing for even, well, it's not boring, it's interesting. Anyway, so we go to meet him, and all I'll say is it was like a life support situation. There, like losing his life was a possibility, and that kind of says it all. And so we find out about Liam, and we hear, and we're like, okay, well, we're gonna go see him. Go see him, and we're toughing it out. We're like, we can do this. It was obviously like pretty intense. We went to the exact same hospital that we spent 4 months with our son with. Blah blah blah. And we meet him, and we're like, whew, that's an intense looking baby right there. Like swollen to the point where his eyes were like barely opening. So like countless wires, tubes. He was on ECMO, which is life support. Like it was a lot, but we were like, I think we felt the Lord with us, and we're like, okay, we can do this. And then following days, I'm getting phone calls from like doctors and like people being like, well, this is happening, and he might have this, and like we might have to deal with this, and there could be permanent stuff and whatever. And I'm like, oh my goodness, like. I was not ready for all of this, and when we first, heard like, okay, there's this baby, and maybe you guys can take him home. I was like, oh, that sounds pretty intense, but yes, we lost our baby, and I would love for a baby boy to be in our house. And then we go and see him, and we're like, God, this baby is, I don't want to say broken. He's not broken, but. Jen said that, okay? Jen said it, so she said that. If Jen said it, I can say it too. I never wrote like this so much. Anyway, I think I had Anyway, so yeah. And I'm gonna be really like honest with you guys on my feelings, because I'm not scared to say this. But like following that, I really realized that I was like idolizing Liam being an immediate redemption for us. We had lost our baby, and I was like, oh, here is what God is doing. Redemption. And then it was so threatened by like literally potentially losing his life or just serious stuff that we would have to go through that we'd have to live with him. I was so offended. I literally said to my husband and to my best friend, I'm trying to remember, I said if Liam dies, I think I'm done with God.
Wow.
I'm not scared to say that. That's the truth. I came to God with that. I'm coming with it to you. It's just like, I feel like a fool to believe in a God that would do this to me. And, you know, obviously, if you've seen Liam, things worked out. And, you know, it was amazing. But I had to go back and look at those feelings. Even though, like, I kind of got, I don't want to say what I wanted, but, like, we kind of did experience that redemption here. And we, you know, have a song in our lives. We have another song on the way, so we're experiencing it. But I had to look at that because I'm not cool with being a person that threatens my God. So I had to go back and say, like, you know, what is in me that is so weak and on anger that, like, I was threatened by this, and I was like, I'm done, and I'm going to just keep doing that, you know, because bad things are going to keep happening to me. You know, sorrow will still happen, and at every turn, if I'm going to be like, sorry, God, you're not really working out for me, you're not sticking with my plans, and that catapulted a lot of things in me, beautiful things. I experienced my plan being crushed with Arlo, and I experienced it, you know, crushed again with Leo, and I will continue to experience my plan being crushed. But Jesus' plan is so much more beautiful. And I see Isaiah 55, his ways are higher, and his thoughts are higher. Okay. So now we can move on. Oh, did I not? Sorry, I didn't click on that. Just poured out sacrifice. That's what I just did. So now we can move on to what we can bring to the Lord. Jesus brings a whole stinking lot, so I feel like I should have had like 10 for him and like 2 for us. Anyway, but there's a lot we can bring to him. Bring your emptiness. Sorry, Pastor Ryan, I kind of stole your topic, so this is empty part 4. Oh. That's been speaking to me over the last couple months. Pastor Ryan has been talking about, bringing your emptiness, so I was like, you know, this fits in perfectly. And I kind of just explained a pretty decent bring your empty. And when we go to God with our feelings and questions and concerns, there's discovery and clarification in who He is. Once again, His identity. Let's see what I have here. Luke. Is this one I was going to read? Yeah, I think so. This one's a little longer. I think it's really cool. So if you want to read it, it's in Luke 24. That's in the New Testament. I love when Pastor Ryan tells you where it is, and he says if you're new to the Bible, but I'm always like, I'm not that new to the Bible, but I still really need this. Especially when it's like a really short one in Old Testament, and you're like, ah. But anyway, Luke, New Testament. So let's just paraphrase, the beginning. We're going to end up reading in 13, but the very beginning. So this is after Jesus is crucified and he's buried. And 2 women go to his grave to bring some spices, to honor him. And they get there, and the stone's rolled away. And then these 2 men that appear kind of as angels are like, he has risen. So they go back to tell the disciples, and they're like, you crazy ladies. That's what you get for calling ladies crazy. But they're like, their words seem like nonsense, so they didn't believe them. Okay, so they're just kind of like, someone done stole Jesus' body. That's all they're thinking. They don't believe he's risen. They're just like, someone was really rude. And just after all this, took it. Anyway. So going into 13, we have 2 disciples. And I'm going to kind of read through this and then explain what it's meant to me in 24:13. Now the same day, 2 of them were going to a village called Emmaus, about 7 miles from Jerusalem. They were talking with each other about everything that happened. As they talked and discussed these things with each other, Jesus came up and walked along with them, but they were kept from recognizing him. Okay, so Jesus comes, they don't know it's Jesus, it's just like this kind of random guy talking to them while they're walking to Emmaus. And this is, what does it say, 7 miles, so they're going to be walking for a while. He asked them, what are you discussing together as you walk along? They stood still, their faces downcast. One of them, named Cleopas, asked, "How are you the only one visiting Jerusalem who does not know the things that have happened here in these days?" "What things?" Jesus asked. "About Jesus of Nazareth," they replied. "He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one who was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, on the third day since all this took place. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, that Jesus wasn't there." He said to them, "How foolish you are, and how slow to believe all that the prophets have spoken." And he's kind of referring to like all these prophets in the Old Testament that have been, talking about like how this is going to go. And Jesus. "Did not the Messiah have to suffer these things, then enter his glory?" And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, he explained to them what was said in all the scriptures concerning himself. As they approached the village to which they were going, Jesus continued on as if he were going a little farther. But they urged him strongly, "Stay with us, for it is nearly evening. The day is almost over." So he went in to stay with them. When he was at the table with them, he took bread, gave thanks, broke it, and began to give it to them. Then their eyes were opened, they recognized him, and he disappeared from their sight. Of course, Jesus. They asked each other, "Were not our hearts burning within us while he talked with us on the road and opened the scriptures to us?" So emphasis on that last verse of were not our hearts burning within us? And that kind of to me, is a good representation of some of my heart through the deepest of grief that I was going through. And there's a lot of me that looks back on it and in the moment, don't get me wrong, there were times where I felt like the Lord was speaking to me. There was times where I wrote down beautiful things in my journal, but there was also majority of the time was just oh my goodness, where are you? And I'm really mad, and I don't know if you're good, and all of this stuff. And that was the majority of it. I didn't, feel the presence of the Lord a lot. But looking back on it, I really do say to myself, was my heart burning within me? Literally, I held our son as he went to be with Jesus, and that's one of the biggest moments that I look back and I'm like, that is the closest I'll ever be to heaven. And wasn't my heart burning within inside me? And I when I read this, I kind of question, why did Jesus choose to hide himself and, not show up as Jesus? Why did he do that sneaky move? It's really cool, so maybe that's why. He just wanted to be gotcha. And this is just kind of my thought. Maybe it's true, maybe it's not. I don't know. But I do feel because he hid himself from that, and they were oh, just some guy. They kind of got out this how have you heard? And they got to talk about their relationship with God, how much it meant to them. And then Jesus got to walk through basically a lesson with them on don't you remember all these prophets? And do you think they would have listened very closely? If he had showed up as Jesus, they would have been let's go see everybody, praise the Lord. And if he would have been now let me tell you about the prophets in the Old Testament, be no, it's okay. We're excited, we're pumped. Don't worry about that. So maybe that emptiness is what they needed to receive it.
That's good.
Just a thought. All right, so
That's good.
6th point in our last book. Use me in your story, God. And this comes with a lot of perspective and trust. This is, it's not about how do I fit God into my story. It's about how do I fit my life into God's story. So often we're so obsessed with what's my story? What's my testimony? What's this? And your story, your testimony is great. But what's God's story? How do you fit into it? Let's humble ourselves a little bit.
Good.
Use me in your story. Let me see if I think I wanted to do this one. Jeremiah. Oh yeah, because I like this one, because I really like finding verses that we take out of context and kind of figuring it out if that makes sense. Because I feel like we serve a God of flipping tables, and I like to flip tables on things too, or let him flip the tables. So if I can find a verse that like we take out of context, I get excited about it because I'm like, you know what?
Yeah.
Except for it's a little annoying though, because then you hear people say it and you're like, oh great, now I'm like picking everything apart. But it's fun. Anyway. That was too much of a tangent. Anyway, where are we at? We're at Jeremiah. I think I wrote 29:11, but it's actually, oh yeah, it's 29:11. I have my little highlighter over it. Where it says, for I know the plans I have you, declares the Lord, plans to prosper you and not to harm you, plans to give you hope and a future. And like, how often, maybe not, I've experienced this. How often do we like pray that when we're like, I want God to do this for me? And this verse says that He has plans to prosper me and not to harm me, to give me hope and future. So it's got to be what I just wanted. It's got to be my plan. But if you go back, and I won't go into too much detail, the verse before that, this is what the Lord says, when 70 years are completed for Babylon, I will come to you and fulfill my good promise to bring you back to this place, for I know the plans I have for you. And so it goes on. Just brief background, this is like during a time of like exile for these people, and this is, Jeremiah's writing this, and Jeremiah was kind of like the bad news prophet. Like people were pretty mad about everything he was, because he was bringing bad news, and he was like, you're going to be exiled for 70 years, these evil people are going to rule the land, and then God will like fulfill his promises. And there are other prophets saying like, no, and yeah, God rebuked that, because there's these false prophets that were saying like, that's not God's plan, and he's like, no, this is my story. This is what Jeremiah is saying is true. Yeah. So, if you look at that verse first, it's just like, okay, let's start out with, here's the crap you're going to go through, but I know the plans I have for you.
Yes.
It's important to look at. And I kind of want to emphasize this too, because something that was really heavy on my heart in the past has been, God, why didn't you answer my prayer? I see you answering prayers. And I want to emphasize this for you, because maybe you're praying for something, or you have prayed for something, and you're just not seeing any answer, or your version of an answer, or whatever it is. And that can be so painful and so hard when you're seeing, like, whether it be, a family member, a loved one, yourself, maybe like chronic illness in your life, and you're just like, God, I have just come to you day after day, praying for healing, and I'm not seeing it. Maybe God has something else for you. I'm not going to flip that on its head too much. I believe Jesus does miracles and believe that Jesus heals. But can we just take a moment to think, like, who said that was going to happen? Yeah.
That's good.
As Pastor Joe says, he's not a vending machine, and he's not a genie in a bottle. So.
Yeah.
All right. So next one, comforting others. Don't have a verse. Oh, we got it. Again, I thought this was too long, so you can write it down and read it later. But just to be like brief, like in comforting others, David and I experienced like some major personal testimonies of support. Pastor Ryan kind of just like they walked with us, like we called them like in tears, just like, this is what's happening, like so upset so many times. We like needed that. David didn't work for like 7 months, and we were okay. I mean, we got like, I don't even need to go into details, but we were like sent so many checks, so much money, so much support. We had a GoFundMe. People we didn't even know were like giving us money. We didn't make food or go to a grocery store for I think like 7 months. And a lot of that was you guys, so thank you. I don't even think we can express that, because it was just like, it honestly was like so much that it was like, whoa. I could be like writing thank you notes like all day long. So thank you. I didn't write a note. But anyway, in that comforting to others. Obviously, this is an invitation for if you see someone else going through grief, to comfort them. But even beyond that, if you're going through grief, guess what? You can comfort someone else big time. There's power in your aching hearts, and there's been people in my life that I know are going through some pretty intense grief, people that I met kind of in our situations, where it was like a job, or the Ronald McDonald House, or whatever. People I've even met after. And the people that have gone through these like really tough situations, they have spoke to me themselves. And like, even like, you don't have to say anything, but just like maybe witnessing, like that is powerful stuff. Like your grieving journey, whether now or past or whatever or future, it's powerful. And you can comfort somebody, even though you're like in need of comfort. Like sometimes your need of comfort is comfort. And just start with listening to each other. Before anything else, we can be intimidated by grief, like seriously. And you know, a lot of times we want people to be over it quick because it hurts us, and we don't want to be in pain. If you can just start with listening, like that's just like first step. Just start there. You'll learn a lot. We had a lot of people that did a lot of listening. So again, thank you. All right, so last one that we can extend to our Father is Thanksgiving. And in that, I kind of just, you know, I'm going to close after this with one other thing. But maybe, you know, as we close, we can kind of reflect on some of this. But I wanted to reflect on times where we were experiencing God with us. And whether it was like those moments where you're like, you look back and you're like, wasn't my heart burning within me? Or if it's like the obvious things, like people giving you money and food and all of this stuff, or someone talking with you. It's really good for our souls to, you know, take a moment to like think like, when were the times that God was with me and I experienced that? You know, it's gonna be food for your soul when, you know, it can be so overwhelming on how easy is it for us to forget all those things and just think about all of the sorrow. And we can worship God. Yeah. I stood here at church for quite a few months and could barely sing a song. I cried probably a lot, and a lot of what we were singing was really painful for me. I was like, do I believe that God's good? The stuff about plans, and I would just like cry to Jesus, and that was it. And that is worship. Yeah. So yeah, if you can, you know, to worship, you know, Jesus through that, like, man, talk about honoring to Him. And doesn't He love that? Like, so much. So that's kind of my last out of my points. I made good time. So I have one other thing though, and I don't know if do you want to do any type of music? We have enough time for that? Yeah. Okay. I'm going to close with one other thing, so it'll probably take me about 5 minutes, maybe. So if you need whatever. I have one other thing, and this is one other thing I wanted to share out of Matthew. Oh, put it up there. Just want to turn to it. So let me just read that. So this is Matthew 11:28-30. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Yes. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle, humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. And once again, I think I can say this is a verse we somewhat take out of context, and I'd like to turn the tables on it. Just again, a little bit of background. Jesus was kind of talking to the people here who were really overwhelmed by the legalistic system, and you know, they were kind of always being told you have to do all of these things, you have to tithe your money, and that's how you earn your salvation. So he's kind of specifically speaking to these people that were like burdened by this because they were yoked to this legalistic system and not yoked to the Lord. And I want to also, you know, add that when Jesus says this yoke is easy, he's not saying it's like and it's just like throw it all on me, I got it. Like, you know what a yoke is. Like, we're together in this, and we're, you know, it's not effortless. It's not just like a cast it away and there you go, Jesus got it. Because you won't find anything in that. So it's not easy, it's not effortless, but it is appropriate. Meaning useful, good, pleasant, suitable. And I think we all kind of have a purpose, you know, in our life. God wants to use us in His story. And His purpose, as we're yoked to Jesus, is not going to be unbearable. But it will be an appropriate weight. And I think the analogy that helps me is if you think about like somebody that's into weightlifting and they need to like use a certain amount of weight to actually build muscle. Like they can't just like, lift these like 2-pound like dumbbells and be like, got the gains. Like they have to like, get the appropriate amount of weight to actually like gain muscle. And you might even have to move up as you go because you maxed that out. And that's a kind of a good like image of this yoke. Like Jesus wants you to be powerful and successful and have a big impact on the people around you. And sometimes that comes with maybe some weights that you have to lift, being a part of his yoke. But you're not alone in that, and you're yoked to Jesus, and that's a big deal. So I think Pastor Ryan was going to just close in prayer. But I really wanted to take this time to kind of do two things, depending on where you're at. And one could be just a time of thanksgiving. Like I said in the last point, just maybe taking some time to think about moments of God with us. Or maybe you can take a minute to analyze this verse. Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy, and my burden is light. And maybe, just taking a moment to think, like, God, like, have I just been searching for the easy way out? Have I been looking for a God that's good for me type of thing? Yeah, and you're a good father, and we want to be a part of your story. And how are you using me? How are you using my grieving journey? How are you using me to comfort others? How are you, using me in all of this? So if we just want to take some time to just reflect on those two things and maybe worship the Lord, that would be awesome. So thank you guys all so much for being a part of this and listening and hearing our story.